Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee. You guys, I'm so thrilled the guests we have on this show today. It's William Doyle and Pasi Sahlberg, who are the authors of Let the Children Play: How More Play Will Save Our Schools and Help Children Thrive. So thank you both for being here. And for the book. I love it. Would each of you just talk a little bit about yourself so listeners, if they aren't already aware of you, know who they're listening to?
Pasi.
Bill, you go first. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Fight.
It's great to be on your show. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm William Doyle. I'm a career New Yorker. My parents co-founded the first Montessori school in New York City, which kind of got me into the business early in life because I was one of the test subjects in the first graduating class. And thank goodness the school is still going strong today, Cadman Montessori School in the Upper East Side. And when I had a child of my own, I happened to be working, who is now 15, I happened to be working on a book about civil rights, about James Meredith, the man who integrated the University of Mississippi 60 years ago. And we didn't have enough words in the book. And I said to James Meredith, what do we do now? We got 40,000 words and we need 60 for the contract. And we decided to interview the greatest experts in America on early and K through 12 education, and which was a passion of James Meredith. It is one, and ask them for their advice on how to fix America's schools. Schools. And I, by the way, have been a career TV producer and writer of narrative nonfiction books. I worked for HBO, PBS, the History Channel, and I've written a number of books on politics and history. And one of the experts we consulted, Howard Gardner, the great educator at Harvard, said, quote, if you want to fix America's schools, look at Finland, which does the opposite of much of what we're doing in the United States. And by the way, read a great book called Finnish Lessons by my partner, Pasi Sahlberg, because that kind of tells the whole story. And I was intrigued by that. Long story short, I got a Fulbright scholarship to come to Finland, study the system, which is very play-based, especially in the early years, and drop my child into the system, which is quite beautiful in many, many ways and does many things differently and perhaps better than the United States is doing right now. Mm-hmm. So that's how I came to this book. Pasi and I hit it off, and we thought that especially the United States deserved a book like this that focused on the biggest missing piece of education and one of the most critical ones, in our opinion, which is play. So that's how we got to where we are.
Great, thanks. All right, Pasi, it's your turn.
Yeah, about the same time when William came to Finland, I was in the United States actually teaching at Harvard University with Howard Gardner, and I think it was 2016 when Lego Foundation awarded me with a prestigious Lego Prize that had been previously awarded to people like Sir Ken Robinson and Nicholas Negroponte and some others. So I took it very seriously to receive a global recognition like this, and I was kind of thinking, what does it mean for my professional life? I hadn't done much work in early education or play before that, a lot of work in creativity and pedagogy and those things. And then we just by accident met with Bill Doyle and started to talk about this. His experience in Finland and mine in the United States. And first we said, let's write a little article for one of the magazines in the United States about this, our experiences. And then knowing William as a first-class writer, he writes very fast and excellent, one of the best writers I've ever known. And so when I was looking at these first drafts, I said, William, this is not an article, this is a book. So that's how it started, and we really went on around the world to look at the play in different countries and different settings, and the rest is history. Then this book came about, and it has given both of us, I guess, a lot of pleasure, and also kind of brought us closer to one another in terms of understanding the importance of play, but also understanding the importance of co-writing, in a sense that you know, I could never write a book like this by myself alone, with having somebody, a first-class writer like William. And Bill, you often tell me that you needed me to make sure that the content, the education aspects are correct. So I think that this book is really a fruit of a very deep and close collaboration and understanding and mutual respect to one another's views and professionalism. And I hope that people see that when they read the book.
Yeah, thank you. So why this book? Why was this the thing you both wanted to work on?
I think probably if I go first, Bill, that it really started from this notion that we had in our conversations that when you were in Finland with your family, you realized how different the Finnish education is in terms of, you know, having much less instruction time and much more emphasis on outdoor play and creativity and childhood in general. You know, the kids go to school much later. I was in the United States, where it was completely opposite. You know, I experienced these questions from a kindergarten, so early childhood centers. My youngest son was, I think he was about 3 years old that time, and you know, people were asking questions like how many words he knows or how many numbers he can count. And I said, you know, in Finland, nobody would ever ask anything like this. That, you know, the question would be rather like, you know, what type of play you like to do. And so we had these conversations with Bill, and kind of realized that there's a trend around the world that is kind of bringing like a declining play, the value that families and certainly education systems give to play, and we just thought that, you know, there's probably room for a book like this, especially bringing the perspectives from a Finnish person like myself living in the United States and an American friend, expert who looks at these things in Finland in a different ways. So we thought it's a kind of an intriguing cocktail of different perspectives. But Bill, how do you see the genesis of this thing?
Right. Well, again, it was very much from being a father myself and sitting on playground benches in New York City, which is in many ways the most magnificent city on earth, with some of the greatest education and most involved parents and opinionated parents, by the way. So I would sit on playground benches, watch my child play, you know, all weekend, making new friends, and I would talk to parents. And the consensus seemed to be that I was starting to accept was that gladiatorial combat and resource hoarding and competitive maneuvering by parents was the best path to the Ivy League, I guess, which
wow,
would be, you know, the reason for living in many ways in these days. The way to clear that path for your child, starting at age, let's say 4, where people tutor their children with professional tutors in New York to get into elite preschools. Think of this phrase. Now,
that's wild.
Now, when you look at the elite preschools in New York City, guess what they do? I went to almost every one of them. There are 8, like the Ivy League, roughly. And, you know, it's $25,000 to $50,000 a year. Guess what they all do pretty much all day with their children from ages, let's say, you know, 3+ to 7, 8 through kindergarten. They play. This is what the rich, elite Park Avenue, Wall Street, and other successful families get. Now, what's happening in the rest of American education for the last 20 years, in a tragic, almost like a horror movie reality, is that the system has been demolished by the cult of standardized testing, which we all, policymakers, many of us, policymakers, especially policymakers who know nothing about early childhood education, have somehow adhered to and surrendered to as the god or the governing metric, let's say, of all education, including early education. As a result, play and the arts and outdoor activity, all the things that you and many of our audience know is the lifeblood, the critical foundation of any education, without which nothing good happens, has been removed from kindergarten. Play is gone in at least half the kindergartens in the United States. So that was kind of a cry for sanity that we issue in our book. The good news is that this book has Let the Children Play has directly triggered a recess law, for example, in the state of Illinois, which has by law restored play to at least 300,000 children who did not have any assurance of getting recess regularly, much recess on a daily basis. It also resulted in 3 New York City school boards issuing pro-recess and pro-play resolutions in a city that has largely wiped out or used recess as punishment, withholding recess. So that's kind of, we see some urgency to this because we think that the more play, the more outdoor activity, and the more freedom we offer children, especially in the early years, the greater the overall outcome. And we think that our book is filled with research that indicates that is a really important reality.
It is. That's one of the things that the writing is just very powerful, but the research that sort of is the foundation for a lot of it was really important to me as I read it. My day job is to teach early childhood education at a community college. So being able to say, oh yeah, here's the research is really helpful with students who are in programs. Most of them already work in an early childhood program, and a lot of them are very academic based and nervous about play, or feel helpless if they want to allow children more play. So I appreciate that. Let me read this bit from the book before we go further. So this, again, the book is called Let the Children Play: How More Play Will Save Our Schools and Help Children Thrive, with the bonus forward by Sir Ken Robinson, which was also fun to read. But so here you wrote, the anti-play warriors believe that in order to quote unquote catch up with nations that achieve higher scores on international benchmark tests, to reduce achievement gaps, and to equip children with, again, quote unquote 21st century skills necessary for future workforce and individual career success, American children as young as 4 years old need to sit still in class and be subjected to near total play deprivation, constant direct instruction, drilling, penalties for failure attached to test data, hours and hours of excessive homework, and chronic sleep deprivation all the way through high school. The anti-play crusaders call this academic rigor necessary to get kids on track for college and career with 21st century skills. Childhood development experts, by contrast, consider it other things: developmentally inappropriate, educational malpractice, and even borderline child abuse. That's pretty strong. So I just will you respond to that? Why you wrote that? What did you mean? Why the strong language?
No, I think the talking about these 21st century skills, I think, and Bill, you can say something about the kind of earlier part, but I'm often, since the book came out some time ago, people have been asking me that, so what are the benefits of play? Like, seriously, why should we pay more attention to early childhood play or play throughout the schooling? And I'm often saying this, my background is I was a secondary school mathematics and science teacher in Finland for many years. And since the 21st century skills, this idea came around that includes, all these important things like complex problem solving and communication and collaboration, and all these C's or whatever they are. Myself and many others say that, these are really difficult things to teach in a school. I don't know how to, what to do in a busy high school schedule or curriculum so that we can teach these important 21st century skills. And I think the one realization that we made with Bill during the research and working on this book is that, many of these benefits that the research and experts who have been looking at the benefits of play are exactly they're almost identical to these 21st century skills. So that's why I think there's a good reason still, and I would probably even use stronger words if I could, writing the same thing again, saying that, if we really take this seriously, that children in the future, that they need these 21st century skills, these thinking and problem solving and communication skills, empathy and leadership, much more than we did when we went to school, then the best thing to do with these kids is to let them play, because that's exactly how these skills are and the habits of minds are developed, rather than trying to directly teach high school kids some of these things. That is very hard, more difficult. So and when I speak about these things to primary school teacher, early childhood educators, I live in Australia now, I do a lot of work in this space. This is like a new thing for many people. I never thought about play as something that would be planting the seeds of these these important skills in life that people need. And as soon as people realize this, that they kind of understand the play, it's not just a kind of having fun or doing something that kids should be doing, that it's really helping children to kind of find a pathway into these 21st century skills that they need in work and life and further studies. That's when people really begin to kind of realize that there's something magic in this play. And that's why like now when I read the William Doyle and Pasi's book, that I really understand what they're saying. But with this, I throw the ball back to you, Bill, and I know that you can articulate this passage of the book more than I could.
Well, every now and then, it's almost like the heavens open up, metaphorically, and some great truth is revealed with a great quote. And two of my favorite quotes in this area are, number one, the American Academy of Pediatrics, children's doctors, who are rarely consulted in the design of schools and curriculum and children's weekly life schedule. They said not long ago, talking about the key to life success for children. Now, what else do parents want for their children? Life success. Like, that's kind of the holy grail. Okay, their quote was that a child's lifelong success depends on their ability to be creative and to apply the lessons learned from playing, unquote. In other words, it's not digital keyboarding skills. It's not it's not pressure, stress. It's not we're doing homework until 10 o'clock at night or 1 a.m. in the morning necessarily, through middle school. It's playing. And Pasi just articulated all the benefits that flow out of playing, on top of which the hard research shows that physical activity, when you define play as including physical activity is like a magic pill. It's free largely, but if you administer it to children in regular doses through the day, like they do here in Finland, 15 minutes per hour, free outdoor play, no matter how rainy or cold it is, children are much sharper, more alert, more focused, and on task for the whole day, because most teachers will tell you that very little learning occurs after 1 p.m. But this way you can extend the focus through the day. So that's number one, is the doctor's quote. And the second quote I love so much is from the 1954 Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education decision, which is rightly hailed as opening the gates of integration in our society. But there's a passage in that decision that I think we all need to remember and, write down in our notebooks. And that is, quote, public education is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms, unquote. And that speaks to the fact that the poorer you are in the United States, I talked earlier about the Ivy League preschools in New York City. Yeah. Well, if you happen to be especially Black or brown and or poor and or in the inner city, your chances of getting any play, which is the developmentally appropriate, expert, research-backed foundation of early education, especially, your chances of getting any play are almost negligible. And that is doing violence to the notion of childhood, in my opinion, and of cherishing childhood. And, Pasi and I got in a very interesting dispute with a self-appointed education reformer who wrote a big article about our book. He said he loved it, but this play thing, I'm paraphrasing, it'll never work for poor kids. Never work. If you give poor kids all this play, you're gonna doom. They'll basically be doomed.
Mm-hmm.
So don't pay attention to that part of the book. And we thought, wait a second, you know what the American Pediatric Association says, the American Academy of Pediatrics, poor children need this more than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real, as Pasi said earlier, sometimes this comes as a new information or like a revelation to even parents or some educators, but it is a headline that should be shouted from the rooftops, which is don't about play. Yes. Give it to children and you'll see the magic happen in their attitude, their learning, and their life, perhaps.
Yeah. I used to be a childcare center director, and I would get so sort of impatient, a little bit grouchy when a parent would call, looking for childcare for their child and say, well, do they learn anything there or do they just play? And then another friend said something like, well, they're advocating for their child's educational success in the way that they've been marketed, like in the way that they know best with the information they have. And that helped me soften a little bit and see my role as sort of a guide and an advocate for play. I just feel like that's so much pressure. Parenting is already so hard, but to feel like if you don't do everything exactly right, and exactly right means academics and early stress and less movement and play deprivation, that's really, that puts folks in a really rough position, I think.
Right. Well, children are, I think, biologically engineered to move, to wiggle, yes, to squirm. One thing they do here and I remember going to for a certain period of time, I went to a Catholic, sort of a stereotypically punitive Catholic grammar school, and I was a boy. I was 12, 11, 10. And I was going crazy all day because I wanted to wiggle and move and run around. And I was ordered not to. So I was, I think, shackled and felt very much imprisoned. But it is a strange reality that when you administer these doses of play, the results, even on short-term standardized tests and focus and on-task behavior, jump significantly. There are experiments being done right now in Texas, Oklahoma, and other parts of the United States where they literally test this, and the results are striking and conclusive and uniformly patterned. So I don't know why we don't do this a lot more. I think parents have to administer pressure to the yes, system, including politicians especially, and get off this standardized test cult that has taken over the system.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back around to 21st century skills because there was another spot in the book. Pasi, you talked about this a lot a minute ago, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow by asking this then. But there's a spot in the book where you say, I don't know which of you wrote this part, but one of you says the phrase 21st century skills is often more of a marketing slogan for reformers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can admit that it's probably my idea. But we have actually, interestingly, very few things in the book that we would have a debate over. But this 21st century skills is something. The turn of the millennium, it came around not from educators or school experts. This was a more of a commercial idea to package some of these things that some people wanted to sell, sometimes to their consultants or people who just wanted to put the old stuff in a new package because of the millennium started. And there was a lot of pushback in the beginning. That time, I remember I was one of those who didn't like the idea that something is brought into education as a as a commercial product. But now I think when we have passed a couple of decades, 20 years behind, that the 21st century skills now has a little bit different thing, because it's not anymore considered as something that somebody wants to sell as it was earlier. That now it really means something that young people, especially young people, need now and tomorrow to understand what's going on in the world, and being successful in work and being successful in life. And it has probably now more neutral meaning in education circles that what it used to be. 20 years ago, people tried to kind of package define what 21st century skills are, and oftentimes we said, I was one of them, and some others who said that many of these things like thinking skills and collaboration and creativity, those things, these are old. They have been around in education a long time.
Yeah.
So I think that it had a kind of a bad flavor 20-25 years ago, but it has now become more neutral, and I think it's a fairly positive and good term to use to briefly say something that otherwise would take a long time to define what it is.
Yeah.
Well, Heather, there's also something that we discovered in China. We went all around the world for this book, literally looking at experiments in Japan and China and Europe and across the global
Mexico.
South. And we in China, there's something extraordinary happening. And, the People's Republic of China is a country with which I have some major policy disagreements,
Sure.
to say the least. However, there are some beautiful things happening in a place called Anji County, Anji. And there's
Jesse Cofino's been on the show a few times with us.
That's terrific, because it's I saw it, I lived and I breathed it, and it's the opposite of everything stereotypical you could imagine early childhood education would be in China. And it is instead a vision of a beautiful, free, outdoor play-based, joy infused childhood for children who are playing in play yards with a hammer and sickle flag flying over them, with portraits of Mao Zedong and Karl Marx in the political teachers lounge. But something that's giving children such joy and freedom, and I think creativity, that they're adopting it more widely there. And that's something I think we should all be looking at and learning from. And there are great things happening here in Finland. I think there is no education utopia, no matter where you go. I've learned that there's challenges everywhere, but again, I keep coming back to the research and the idea that maybe we don't have to pressure cooker our children to deliver future success to them. Maybe we should trust them a bit more to figure out their own path, and that regular, constant doses of the childhood language of learning, play, which I think extends, Pasi and I think that this extends well into high school, that we should be delivering education in a way that allows much more creativity and freedom and experimentation, and encouraging children to fail and fail repeatedly and learn from that failure, and have the system rearrange itself to serve children's needs, rather than forcing children into a box that they must perform in or be declared failures.
Right. And failure is always a deficit in some of our systems. I think it's in this book, one of you, or you talk about a failure academy. Does that sound familiar?
It sounds, yes. Yeah. And William, you live in a country now that is the only country in the world I know that celebrates every year they have a national failure day. That is, I think it's the 13th of October or something like this, where everyone, in the workplaces and schools and communities, they recognize the importance of failure and bring kind of a good anecdotes and stories about that. So I think that's another one of those free things that anybody can take and try to understand differently the power of failure and learning from mistakes that play is all about.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
We have Success Academy. Why not a few days of Failure Academy every month? And where principals stand up and explain to the whole community how they screwed up over the last couple of weeks and how things are going wrong. I remember there was I did the grand tour of all the private schools in New York City, both for this book and for my child's education. He wound up going to some private schools and to some public schools. But the number one school in New York City, like the ultimate private school, is Trinity School. And that was the one headmaster who came out on the stage to all of these high achieving parents, by the hundreds. And he said, "We're not doing very well here." And there was a gasp in the crowd. And he basically did a confession of like failure. It was like a failure academy. And I thought, this is the most creative, inspiring thing I ever saw. And he went through a list of things that they weren't doing that well: diversity, several other areas. And I thought, boy, that's the way I'm going to start all my meetings from now on. Confess failure.
Confess your failures. It's the new icebreaker. So I know we've been talking for a while, but there was one more thing that I wanted to hear a little bit about, because which is play's impact on children's mental well-being, and you kind of touch on this at the end, where you not the end, but towards the end, you highlight that intrinsically motivated children play because they love it. And intrinsic motivation is rooted in 3 fundamental psychological needs for children's development: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So I didn't tell you I was going to ask it about that part, but can you just talk a little bit more about how that's connected to play, or what intrinsic means for play?
No, I think that intrinsic motivation, that is a root of all meaningful things, including learning, is something that is fundamental to play. In the book, I think one area that we spend more time than many others is to try to define what defines play. How do we understand that? And I think that our starting point was the play has to be intrinsically motivated, meaning that it's something that the children do, or whoever is playing, because they really want to do it. Mm-hmm. It's not something that children should not play because teacher or parents are asking them to do that, but they feel that they have to do it. And even worse, that then they will be rewarded or given a grade or something like that. That much of the learning in school is all about. It's not. Much of the learning, unfortunately, still in school is not intrinsically motivated. It's something that kids do because they think that they have to do it to earn a grade or something like that, that they can move on. And in a play, I think the fundamental element is that the children do it because it's a natural way of living and making sense out of the world. You asked about the mental health thing. I think this book was published just at the dawn of this big global pandemic called COVID-19 crisis. And what we learned, we didn't know anything about COVID, of course, when we were writing the book, because it came out before that. But what I saw here in Australia, and Australia was one of those places, both Melbourne and Sydney, that was pretty much locked down a long periods of time, meaning that kids were not able to go out. Their schools were closed. And what many people now say is that the play in a way was a savior for many kids to keep them sane at home, because they could do the things that they couldn't see their friends or do the normal things. That play was kind of a thing, and this is what I hear from many parents and also educators, that play was the thing that helped children to make sense of this crazy world that we were in, that we hardly remember now. It's just a couple of years ago. Yeah. And that the people realize that play, the power of play is also partly because it helps people to understand the world around them. And in good and bad, when you have beauty and nature and all these things, that you kind of realize how beautiful world is that you live in. But also when things go bad, like during the COVID, when many of these normal things were restricted, that play is something that helps you to understand, what's going on, and helps you to kind of keep this flame of hope, burning, that, someday this will be over. And that's why I think, for this mental health point of view, now what the kind of outcomes of this thing is that we understand many people understand much more how important the play actually is, to make sure that we can enhance and maintain the mental health wellness of our children.
Yeah.
And Heather, you remember there was a famous Seinfeld episode where
I'm such a Seinfeld junkie.
Well, you know this better than
nothing about that, so keep on talking.
Well, George Costanza suddenly started doing everything the exact opposite of what he had been doing.
Yeah.
And his life was transformed into success, into a golden future. And I think that a lot of what we do in childhood education, we should just stop and think for a second about maybe doing largely the opposite of doing some of the things that are being done here in Finland and in rural China that we write about in the book, and metropolitan Tokyo that we write about in the book, and learning from each other more. And we talk to a lot of children in this book. And Pasi Sahlberg, my co-author, launched a new playground in a little town in Croatia, and we went to the children there to talk about play. This is just a beautiful, it was an old-fashioned, kind of a rusty old playground, and Pasi created a new playground. We talked to children, and what they said, I think, is what children would say around the world. They said things like, hey, listen, what if an adult told you, we asked them, you shouldn't be playing so much. Playing is kind of silly. It's a waste of time. And these were children from 4 to 8 or 10. And almost universally, they would say things like, well, I tell that adult that they're being silly. I would just keep playing. Or that's ridiculous. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. I would tell this adult to come play with me. And there was the last thought is that there was a girl here in Finland about 12, 13 years old, a friend of my son's. And I asked her, quite innocently, hey, so what age do you think people stop going to the playground? Like, when does that happen around here? Is it 11? Is it 12? And she looked at me very evenly with cold eyes. And she said, I will never stop playing. We will never leave the playground. That's straight.
That's right. Do you understand? I will never leave this playground.
And I thought we need to hear that. We need the voice of children a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Pasi has campaigned for his whole career. And maybe that's where we should be starting. How about asking them what they want more of and what they need? One other thought is sometimes parents in New York, I talk to them about this, and they say, it's Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
If you stand back, put your hands down, and go against the wall and don't interfere with children's play and children's activity, they're going to wind up like Lord of the Flies. They're going to slaughter each other and, drink each other's blood, I guess. But there was a real Lord of the Flies. That book was based on a real episode where the children, I think it was a half a dozen or a dozen boys, were stranded on an island for a very, very long period of time. What did they do? They cooperated. They helped each other. They all survived and they all thrived, to this day as adults. So maybe that's the reality that we adults need to think about.
Yeah, my experience has been the more playful I became and the more play I'll say, quote unquote, allowed children to do, the fewer behavior problems I actually saw, or the fewer things I felt like were problems, which was the opposite of the expectation. I hear that Lord of the Flies all the time when I talk about moving back to play in our early childhood programs, but my own experience is it's opposite. I'm sorry, Pasi.
Yeah, no, it's like the George Bernard Shaw said that we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing.
Yes, that's a great one. I love that one. Yeah. That might be a good place to wrap up our conversation on that quote from George Bernard Shaw. Is there anything, are there any last thoughts, things you hoped to talk about or want to leave folks with?
Well, I would just reinforce what Pasi said about the post-COVID. All you read about in the United States these days is children are falling behind. They've got to catch up. And that usually means emergency accelerated tutoring. It means a lot more time on screens being drilled into various software programs. And maybe we should all realize that these children are all going to grow up with certain deficits and strengths, and that in addition to helping them academically, which is important, of course, we've got to give them the thing that they want the most, that they're missing the most, and we have taken away from them. We have to give it back to them. This has been given to children, since the dawn of time. This has been a memory and a human behavior. There's one expert in our book who said that he thinks that half the diagnoses of ADHD in the United States are misdiagnosed situations of children who are being deprived of play and movement and physical freedom, that part of play. And if that's true, if that's true, that's such a mega insight. So we should open our minds to what we read in the headlines and what some of the so-called experts who are not early childhood experts, not teachers, are telling us, the politicians and the policymakers, and pay more attention to the children. And I think we may wind up helping themselves and helping them and ourselves a great deal more if we did that.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for this conversation and for the book. We'll link the book when the podcast comes out, so maybe everybody will get their hands on it, and we can keep the revolution going towards play. But I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you both helping me figure out the time zones as we tried to coordinate Indiana and Helsinki and Melbourne. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.